So I will be talking about how India impacted the American identity through the works of Transcendentalism. So Transcendentalism was the first major American literary movement, which took place in the 1830s. The three major authors of Transcendentalism are Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is the father of Transcendentalism, Walt Whitman, and Henry David Thoreau. The message of Transcendentalism is trust yourself. They believe that the human soul is innately good, and if you trust your soul, then you will find personal truth. But they said that there is no one universal truth, and everyone must be self-reliant in finding their own personal truth. And they believed that the way to find personal truth was through observing nature. And it's important to say that the Transcendentalists were not the first to say this. They were not the first to say, you find truth in nature, or that the human soul is innately good. Emerson, the father of Transcendentalism, wrote, "The first thing we have to say respecting what are called new views here in New England at the present time is that they are not new, but the very oldest thoughts cast into the mold of these new times." So essentially, Transcendentalism rewrote the oldest thought of man into a system of living for the new generation. So they established it as a movement. And this wasn't by accident, because Emerson actively advocated for Transcendentalism to be the voice of the American people, because at the time, this was the first distinctive American movement. And so everything thus far was just a reflection of being British and living in the US, or being French and living here. But this was the first voice that was distinctly American. And he believed that the ideas of Transcendentalism were also the same ideals as democracy. And out of all the works of Transcendentalism, civil disobedience had the most profound effect on our democracy, because it created what is now the peaceful protest. And it has become a cornerstone of American democracy, and the ideal for democracy everywhere in the world. Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. all say that civil disobedience was an important inspiration for their own freedom-fighting movements. Some can even go as far as saying that the ideas that what we call our American values are in fact transcendental values. The problem with this argument is, what does it mean to be an American? I'm sure everyone in this room has a different idea. But if we look into literature, there's an author by the name of Hector St. John du Clair, who wrote letters to an American farmer. And he came to this country during the Revolution, and he wrote an essay called, "What is an American?" in which he asked, what is this new man? What is this American? And in this essay, he outlined that an American was tolerant, free to make any decision that he pleased, or she pleased, and it prized individualism. And these are all the foundations of Transcendentalism. So he predated Transcendentalism, but as I said before, they did not create Transcendentalism. It's the oldest thought of man. They just established it as a movement and made it the American voice in many ways. So many can see the US as we are a westernized nation, that we are Europeanized, but some of our core values at the heart of the American identity has its roots directly in the East and not the West, more specifically India. In fact, the motto of the Transcendentalist Club is Ex Orient Lux, which means the light of Asia. So the Transcendentalists actively recognized that their inspiration came from Eastern philosophy, and that it wasn't Western. In the Transcendentalist magazine, The Dial, they publish excerpts from the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita, which are two important Hindu holy texts. So the Indian philosophy's influence on Transcendentalist literature is direct. Thoreau and Walden wrote, "In the morning I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmogonal philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, since whose composition years of gods have elapsed, and in comparison with our modern world and its literature seems puny and trivial. The pure Walden water is mingled with the sacred waters of the Ganges." His admiration for India in this quote is very clear. He compares to his own Walden waters where he lived to the sacred waters of the Ganges. And this wasn't the only time that he mentioned it. Just in Walden, he also mentioned who loved so well the philosophy of India. So India wasn't just like a little blurb here and there. It was a central part of his book, Walden. In Walden, just one book he wrote, he directly quoted Vishnu Panana, "Be not afflicted, my child. For who shall assign to thee what thou hast left undone? The Harivamsa, another Hindu holy text. It's an epic poem. Lord Krishna, there are none happy in the world but beings who enjoy freely a vast horizon. And the Vedas, all intelligence is awake in the morning. These are all very important Hindu holy texts. Some might even go as far as comparing Thoreau to a yogi, which is a Hindu holy man. And Thoreau himself called himself a yogi in his journals and in some of his poems. He also wrote about admiring the philosophy of Sankhya, which is an Indian philosophy that emphasizes nature as the way to find personal truth. And most scholars will note that this reinforced the idea that Transcendentalism finds truth through nature. Walt Whitman, in Leaves of Grass, wrote a passage to India, a poem which I'll show you a short excerpt from. So he clearly also admired Indian philosophy, not as much as the others. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is the father of Transcendentalism, had copies of the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana in his library. And he's also documented reading other Hindu holy texts, most of them, and all Sanskrit literature, not just Hindu texts. His poem, his essay, The Oversoul, is most likely a direct translation from the Bhagavad Gita. And so is Maya, which means Mother Earth in the Sanskrit language, pulled directly from the Bhagavad Gita. So although it's not directly clear to us that Transcendentalist literature has its roots in Eastern philosophy, it has always been very clear to India. They've always prized the Transcendentalists as part of them. Upon Emerson's death in 1882, Pratap Sundar Muzumdar, the author of Emersonism from India, wrote, "Yes, Emerson had all the wisdom and spirituality of the Brahmins. In whomsoever the eternal Brahma breathed, the unquenchable fire, he was the Brahmin. And in that sense, Emerson was the best of Brahmins." So here you have the Indians accepting Emerson as one of their own because of his kinship with their thought. So to India, it's always been clear that Transcendentalist is Eastern philosophy. It's Indian philosophy in the West. So Transcendentalist literature is dependent upon Indian philosophy. They're intertwined. And by extension, part of our American identity is due to Indian philosophy. So the US is a westernized country. We are part of Western civilization. But part of our core beliefs have always been from Asia.